Welcome to Thueringer, Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Desert of Wheat by Zane, Chapter 10. He almost fell asleep, waiting there with his back against a fence post. The dawn came, and the rosy sunrise, and he discovered not half a mile away a good-sized town where he believed he surely could hire an automobile. Waiting grew to be so tedious that he decided to risk the early hour and proceeded toward the town. Upon the outskirts he met a farmer boy who, in reply to a question, said the town was Connell. Kurt found another early riser in the person of a blacksmith who evidently was a Yankee and proud of it. He owned a car that he was willing to hire out on good security. Kurt satisfied him on that score and then proceeded to ask how to get across the Copper River and into Golden Valley. The highway followed the railroad from that town to Calotis and there crossed a big trunk line railroad to turn south toward the river. In half an hour, during which time Kurt was enabled to breakfast, the car was ready. It was a large car, rather ancient and the worse for wear, but its owner assured Kurt that it would take him where he wanted to go, and he need not be afraid to drive fast. With that inspiring knowledge, Kurt started off. Before 10 o'clock, Kurt reached Kylo, far from Copper River, with the Blue Mountains in sight, and from there less confusing directions to follow. He had been lucky. He had passed the wreck of the freight train upon which he had ridden from Adrian. His car had been surrounded by rough men, and only quick wits saved him at least delay. He had been hailed by more than one group of tramping IWW men, and he had passed camps and freight yards where idlers were congregated, and lastly he had seen far across the valley a pall of smoke from forest fire. He was going to reach many waters in time to warn Anderson, and that fact gave him strange exultation. When it was assured, and he had the $80,000 deposited in a bank, he could feel that his gray, gloomy future would have several happy memories. How would Lenore Anderson feel toward a man who had saved her father? The thought was too rich, too sweet for Kurt to dwell upon. Before noon, Kurt began to climb gradually up off the wonderfully fertile bottomlands, where the endless orchards and boundless gardens delighted his eye, and the towns grew fewer and farther between. Kurt halted at Huntington for water, and when he was about ready to start, a man rushed out of a store, glanced hurriedly up and down the almost deserted street, and espying Kurt, ran to him. "Message over phone! IWW! Hell to pay!" he cried excitedly. "What's up? Tell me the message," replied Kurt calmly. "It just come from Vale. Anderson, the big rancher. He phoned to send men out on all roads to stop his car. His daughter's in it. She's been made off with IWWs." Kurt's heart leaped. The bursting blood burned through him and receded to leave him cold, tingling. Anything might happen to him this day. He reached inside the seat to grasp the disjointed rifle, and 3 swift movements seemed to serve to unwrap it and put the pieces together. "What else did Anderson say?" he asked sharply. "That likely the car would head for the hills where the IWWs are camped." "What road leads here that way?" "Take the left-hand road at the end of town," replied the man more calmly. 10 miles down you'll come to a fork. There's where the IWWs will turn off to go up into the foothills. Anderson just phoned. You can head off his car if it's on the hill road, but you'll have to drive. Do you know Anderson's car? Don't you want men with you? No time, called Kurt as he leaped into the seat and jammed on the power. I'll send cars all over, shouted the man as Kurt whirred away. Kurt's eyes and hands and feet hurt with the sudden intensity of strain. All his nervous force seemed set upon that one great task of driving and guiding that car at the limit of its speed. Huntington flashed behind, two indistinct streaks of houses. An open road, slightly rising, stretched ahead. The wind pressed so hard that he could scarcely breathe. The car gave forth a humming roar. Kurt's heart labored, swollen and tight, high in his breast, and his thoughts were swift, tumultuous. An agony of dread battled with a dominating but strange certainty. He felt belief in his luck. Circumstances, one by one, had led to this drive, and in every one passed by, he felt the direction of chance. He sped by fields of wheat, a wagon that he missed by an inch, some stragglers on the road, and then, far ahead, he saw a signpost of the Forks. As he neared it, he gradually shut off the power to stop at the crossroads. He got out to search for fresh car tracks turning up to the right. There were none. If Anderson's car was coming on that road, he would meet it. Kurt started again, but at reasonable speed, while his eyes were sharp on the road ahead. It was empty. It sloped down for a long way and made a wide curve to the right, along the base of hilly pasture land, and then again turned. And just as Kurt's keen gaze traveled that far, a big automobile rounded the bend, coming fast. He recognized the red color, the shape of the car. Anderson's, he cried, with that same lift of his heart, that bursting gush of blood. No dream. I see it, and I'll stop it. The advantage was all his. He would run along at reasonable speed, choose a narrow place, stop his car so as to obstruct the road, and get out with his rifle. It seemed a long stretch down that long slope, and his car crept along while the other gradually closed the gap. Slower and slower Kurt ran, then turned half across the road and stopped. When he stepped out, the other car was 200 yards or more distant. Kurt saw, when the driver slackened his speed, there appeared to be only two people in the car, both in front. But Kurt could not be sure of that until it was only 50 yards away. Then he swung out his rifle and waved for the driver to stop. But he did not stop. Kurt heard a scream. He saw a white face. He saw the driver swing his hand across that white face, dashing it back. "Halt!" yelled Kurt at the top of his lungs. But the driver hunched down and put on the power. The red car leaped. As it flashed by, Kurt recognized Nash and Anderson's daughter. She looked terrified. Kurt dared not shoot for fear of hitting the girl. Nash swerved, took the narrow space left him, smashing the right front wheel of Kurt's car, and got by. Kurt stepped aside and took a quick shot at the tire of Nash's left hind wheel. He missed. His heart sank, and he was like ice as he risked another. The little high-power bullet struck and blew the tire off the wheel. Nash's car lurched, skidded into the bank not 30 yards away. With a bound, Kurt started for it, and he was there when Nash had twisted out of his seat and over the door. "Far enough, don't move," ordered Kurt, presenting the rifle. Nash was ghastly white, with hunted eyes and open mouth, and his hands shook. "Oh, it's Kurt Dorn," he cried with a broken voice. Kurt saw the girl fumble with the door on her side, open it, and stagger out of his sight. Then she reappeared around the car, bareheaded, disheveled, white as chalk, with burning eyes and bleeding lips. She gazed at Kurt as if to make sure of her deliverance. "Miss Anderson, if he's harmed you," broke out Kurt hoarsely. "Oh, don't kill him. He hasn't touched me," she replied wildly. "But your lips are bleeding." "Are they? She put a trembling hand to them. He struck me, that's nothing. But you have saved me from God only knows what. I have. From him? Demanded Kurt. What is he? He's a German, replied Lenore, and red burned out of the white of her cheeks. Secret agent, IWW, plotter against my father's life. Oh, he knocked father off the car, dragged him. He ran the car away with me, forced me back. He struck me. Oh, if I were a man. Nash responded with a passion that made his face drip with sweat and distort into savage fury of defeat and hate. You two-faced cat, he hissed. You made love to me. You fooled me. You let me... Shut up, thundered Kurt. You German dog. I can't murder you because I'm American. Do you get that? But I'll beat you within an inch of your life. As Kurt bent over to lay down the rifle, Nash darted a hand into the seat for a weapon of some kind. But Kurt, in a rush, knocked him over the front guard. Nash howled. He scrambled up with bloody mouth. Kurt was on him again. Take that, cried Kurt, low and hard, as he swung his arm. The big fist that had grasped so many plow handles took Nash full on that bloody mouth and laid him flat. Come on, German, get out of the trench. Like a dog, Nash thrashed and crawled, scraping his hands in the dirt, to jump up and fling a rock that Kurt ducked by a narrow margin. Nash followed it, swinging wildly, beating at his adversary. Passion long contained burst in Kurt. He tasted the salt of his own blood where he had bitten his lips. Nash showed as in a red haze. Kurt had to get his hands on this German, and when he did, it liberated a strange and terrible joy in him. No weapon would have sufficed. Hardly aware of Nash's blows, Kurt tore at him, swung and choked him, bore him down on the bank, and there beat him into a sodden, bloody-faced heap. Only then did a cry of distress, seemingly from far off, pierce Kurt's ears. Miss Anderson was pulling at him with frantic hands. "Oh, don't kill him! Please don't kill him!" she was crying. "Kurt, for my sake, don't kill him!" That last poignant appeal brought Kurt to his senses. He let go of Nash. He allowed the girl to lead him back. Panting hard, he tried to draw a deep, full breath. "Oh, he doesn't move," whispered Lenore with wide eyes at Nash. "Miss Anderson, he's not even insensible," panted Kurt. "But he's licked, good and hard." The girl leaned against the side of the car with a hand buried in her heaving breast. She was recovering. The gray shade left her face. Her eyes, still wide and dark and beginning to glow with softer emotions, were upon Kurt. You were the only one to come," she murmured. "I prayed. I was terribly frightened. Renke was taking me to the IWW camp up in the hills." "Renke?" queried Kurt. "Yes, that's his German name." Kurt awoke to the exigencies of the situation. Searching in the car, he found a leather belt. With this, he securely bound Renke's hands behind his back and rolled him down into the road. "My first German prisoner," said Kurt, half seriously. "Now, Miss Anderson, we must be doing things. We don't want to meet a lot of IWWs out here. My car is out of commission. I hope yours is not broken." Kurt got into the car and found to his satisfaction that it was not damaged so far as running gear was concerned. After changing the ruined tire, he backed down the road and turned to stop near where Renke lay. Opening the rear door, Kurt picked him up as if he had been a sack of wheat and threw him into the car. Next, he secured the rifle that had been such a burden and had served him so well in the end. "Get in, Miss Anderson," he said, "and show me where to drive you home." She got in beside him, making a grimace as she saw Renke lying behind her. Kurt started and ran slowly by the damaged car. He knocked a wheel off. "I'll have to stand back." Oh, I thought it was all over when we hit, said the girl. Kurt experienced a relaxation that was weakening. He could hardly hold the wheel, and his mood became one of exultation. Father suspected this, Renke, went on Lenore, but he wanted to find out things from him, and I understood. To twist Mr. Germany round my finger. I made a mess of it. He lied. I didn't make love to him, but I listened to his love-making, and arrogant German love-making it was. I'm afraid I made eyes at him and let him believe I was smitten. Oh, and all for nothing. I'm so ashamed. But he lied. Her confidence, at once pathetic and humorous and contemptuous, augmented Kurt's Homeric mood. He understood that she would not even let him for a moment have a wrong impression of her. It must have been hard, agreed Kurt. Did you find out anything at all? Not much, she replied. Then she put a hand on his sleeve. Your knuckles are all bloody. So they are. I got that, punching our German friend. Oh, how you did beat him, she cried. I had to look. My ire was up too. It wasn't very womanly of me that I gloried in the sight. But you cried out. You pulled me away, exclaimed Kurt. That was because I was afraid you'd kill him, she replied. Kurt swerved his glance for an instant to her face. It was at once flushed and pale, with the deep blue of downcast eyes shadowy through her long lashes, exceedingly sweet and beautiful to Kurt's sight. He bent his glance again to the road ahead. Miss Anderson felt kindly and gratefully toward him, as was, of course, natural. But she was somehow different from what she had seen upon the other occasions he had seen her. Kurt's heart was full to bursting. I might have killed him, he said. I'm glad you stopped me. That frenzy of mine seemed to be the breaking of a dam. I have been dammed up within. Something had to break. I've been unhappy for a long time. I saw that. What about? She replied. The war and what it's done to Father. We're estranged. I hate everything German. I love the farm. My chance in life is gone. The wheat dead, the worry about the IWW, and that's not all. Again she put a gentle hand on his sleeve and left it there for a moment. The touch thrilled all through Kurt. I'm sorry. Your position is sad, but maybe it is not utterly hopeless. You'll come back after the war. I don't know what I want to come back, he said, for then it'd be just as bad. Worse. Miss Anderson, it won't hurt to tell you the truth. A year ago, that first time I saw you, I fell in love with you. I think when I'm away over in France, I'd like to feel that you know it can't hurt you, and it'll be sweet to me. I fought against the madness, but fate was against me. I saw you again, and it was all over with me. He paused, catching his breath. She was perfectly quiet. He looked on down the winding road. There were dust clouds in the distance. I'm afraid I grew bitter and moody, he went on, but the last 48 hours have changed me forever. I found that my poor old dad had been won over by these unscrupulous German agents of the IWW. But I saved his name. I've got the money he took for the wheat we may never harvest. But if we do harvest, I can pay all our debt. Then I learned of a plot to ruin your father, to kill him. I was on my way to many waters. I can warn him. Last of all, I have saved you. The little hand dropped away from his coat sleeve. A soft, half-smothered cry escaped her. It seemed to him she was about to weep in her exceeding pity. Miss Anderson, I'd rather not have you to pity me. Mr. Dorn, I certainly don't pity you, she replied with an unexpected and strange tone. It was full and seemed to ring in his ears. I know there never was and never could be any hope for me. Oh, you know that, murmured the soft, strange voice. But Kurt could not trust his ears. and he had to make haste to terminate the confession into which his folly and emotion had betrayed him. He scarcely heard her words. Yes, I told you why I wanted you to know. And now forget that, and when I'm gone, if you think of me ever, let it be about how much better it made me to have all this good luck to help your father and to save you. The dust cloud down the road came from a string of automobiles flying along at express speed. Kurt saw them with relief. Here come the cars on your trail, he called out. Your father will be in one of them. Kurt opened the door of the car and stepped down. He could not help his importance or his pride. Anderson, who came running between two cars that had stopped abreast, was coatless and hatless, covered with dust, pale and fire-eyed. Mr. Anderson, your daughter is safe, unharmed, Kurt assured him. My girl, cried the father huskily and hurried to where she leaned out of her seat. All right, Dad, she cried as she embraced him, only a little shaky yet. It was affecting for Dorn to see that meeting, and through it to share something of its meaning. Anderson's thick neck swelled and colored, and his utterance was unintelligible. His daughter loosened her arm from around him and turned her face toward Kurt. Then he imagined he saw two blue stars sweetly, strangely shining upon him. Father, it was our friend from the bend, she said. He happened along. Anderson suddenly changed to the cool, smiling man Kurt remembered. Howdy, Kurt, he said, and crushed Kurt's hand. What did you do to him? Kurt made a motion toward the back of the car. Then Anderson looked over the seats. With that, he opened the door, and in one powerful haul, he drew Renke sliding out into the road. Renke's bruised and bloody face was uppermost, a rather gruesome sight. Anderson glared down upon him, while men from the other cars crowded about. Renke's eyes resembled those of a cornered rat. Anderson's jaw bulged, his big hands clenched. Bill, you throw this fellow in your car and land him in jail. I'll make a charge against him, said the rancher. Mr. Anderson, I can save some valuable time, interposed Kurt. I've got to return a car I broke down. And there's my wheat. Will you have one of these men drive me back? Sure, but won't you come home with us? Said Anderson. I'd like to, but I must get home, replied Kurt. Please let me speak a few words for your ear alone. He drew Anderson aside and briefly told about the $80,000, threw back his coat to show the bulging pockets. Then he asked Anderson's advice. I'd deposit the money and wire the Spokane miller, returned the rancher. I know him. He'll leave the money in the bank till your wheat is safe. Go to the National Bank in Kylo. Mention my name. Then Kurt told Anderson of the plot against his fortunes and his life. Newman. IWW. German intrigue, growled the rancher. All in the same class. Dorn, I'm forewarned, and that's forearmed. I'll beat this outfit at their own game. They returned to Anderson's car. Kurt reached inside for his rifle. Aren't you going home with us? Asked the girl. Why, Miss Anderson, I'm sorry. I'd love to see many waters, floundered Kurt, but I can't go now. There's no need. I must hurry back to my troubles. I wanted to tell you something at home, she returned shyly. Tell me now, said Kurt. She gave him such a glance as he had never received in his life. Kurt felt himself as wax before those blue eyes. She wanted to thank him. That would be sweet, but would only make his ordeal harder. He steeled himself. You won't come? She asked, and her smile was wistful. No, thank you ever so much. Will you come to see me before you go to war? I'll try, but you must promise. You've done so much for me and my father. I want you to come to see me at my home. Then I'll come, he replied. Anderson clambered in the car beside his daughter and laid his big hands on the wheel. Sure he'd come, or we'll go after him, he declared heartily. So long, son. Chapter 11. Late in the forenoon of the next day, Kurt Dorn reached home. A hot harvest wind breathed off the wheat fields. It swelled his heart to see the change in the color of that section of blue stem. The gold had a tinge of rich, ripe brown. Kurt's father awaited him, a haggard, gloomy-faced man, unkempt and hollow-eyed. Was it you who robbed me? He shouted hoarsely. Yes, replied Kurt. He had caught the eager hope and fear in the old man's tone. Kurt expected that confession would bring on his father's terrible fury, a mood to dread. But old Dorn showed immense relief. He sat down in his relaxation from what must have been intense strain. Kurt saw weariness, a shade in the gray-lined face that had never been there before. What did you do with the money? Asked the old man. I banked it in Kylo, replied Kurt. Then I wired your miller in Spokane, so you're safe if we can harvest the wheat. Old Dorn nodded thoughtfully. There had come a subtle change in him. Presently he asked Kurt if men had been hired for the harvest. No, I've not seen any I would trust, replied Kurt. And then he briefly outlined Anderson's plan to ensure a quick and safe harvesting of the grain. Old Dorn objected to this on account of the expense. Kurt argued with him and patiently tried to show him the imperative need of it. Dorn apparently was not to be won over. However, he was remarkably mild in comparison with what Kurt had expected. Father, do you realize now that the men you were dealing with at Wheatley are dishonest? I mean with you, they would betray you. Old Dorn had no answer for this. Evidently he had sustained some kind of shock that he was not willing to admit. Look here, Father, went on Kurt in slow earnestness. He spoke in English because nothing would ever make him break his word and ever again speak a word of German. And his father was not quick to comprehend English. Can't you see that the IWW mean to cripple us wheat farmers this harvest? No, replied old Dorn stubbornly. But they do. They don't want work. If they accept work, it is for a chance to do damage. All this IWW talk about more wages and shorter hours is deceit. They make a bold face of discontent. That is all a lie. The IWW is out to ruin the great wheat fields and the great lumber forests of the Northwest. I do not believe that, declared his father stoutly. What for? Kurt meant to be careful of that subject. No matter what for. It does not make any difference what it's for. We've got to meet it to save our wheat. Now won't you believe me? Won't you let me manage the harvest? I will not believe, replied old Dorn stubbornly. Not about my wheat. I know they mean to destroy. They are against rich men like Anderson, but not me or my wheat. There is where you are wrong. I'll prove it in a very few days. But in that time I can prepare for them and outwit them. Will you let me? Go ahead, replied old Dorn gruffly. It was a concession that Kurt was amazed and delighted to gain, and he set about at once to act upon it. He changed his clothes and satisfied his hunger, and saddling his horse, he started out to visit his farmer neighbors. The day bade fair to be rich in experience. Jerry, the foreman, was patrolling his long beat up and down the highway. Jerry carried a shotgun and looked like a sentry. The men under him were on the other side of the section of wheat, and the ground was so rolling that they could not be seen from the highway. Jerry was unmistakably glad and relieved to see Kurt. Something's goings on, he declared with a grin. Since you left, there's been 116 IWW tramps along this here road. Have you had any trouble? Inquired Kurt. Wow, I reckon it wasn't trouble, but every time I took a peg at some sneak, I sort of broke out sweating cold. You shot at them? Sure, I shot when I seen Eddie loafing along in the dark. Two of them shot back at me, and after that I wasn't particular to aim high. Reckon I'm about dead for sleep. I'll relieve you tonight, replied Kurt. Jerry, doesn't the wheat look great? Wow, I reckon. And walking along here when it's quiet and no wind blowing, I can just hear the wheat crack. It's getting right fast and sure the biggest crop we ever raised. But I'm telling you, when I think how we'll ever harvest it, my insides just sinks like lead. Kurt then outlined Anderson's plan, which was received by the foreman with eager approval and the assurance that the neighbor farmers would rally to his call. Kurt found his nearest neighbor, Olson, cutting a thin, scarcely ripe barley. Olson was running a new McCormick harvester and appeared delighted with the machine, but cast down by the grain prospects. He did not intend to cut his wheat at all. It was a dead loss. 2 sections, 1,280 acres, he repeated gloomily, and the third bad year. Darn, I can't pay the interest to my bank. Olson's sun-dried and wind-carved visage was as hard and rugged and heroic as this desert that had resisted him for years. Kurt saw under the lines and the bronze of all the toil and pain and unquenchable hope that had made Olson a type of the men who had cultivated this desert of wheat. I'll give you $500 to help me harvest, said Kurt, bluntly and briefly stated his plan. Olson whistled. He complimented Anderson's shrewd sense. He spoke glowingly of that magnificent section of wheat that absolutely must be saved. He promised Kurt every horse and every man on his farm, but he refused the $500. Oh, say, you'll have to accept it, declared Kurt. You've done me many good turns, asserted Olson. But nothing like this. Why, this will be a rush job with all the men and horses and machines and wagons I can get. It'll cost $10,000–15,000 to harvest that section. Even at that, and paying Anderson will clear $20,000 or more. Olson, you've got to take the money. All right, if you insist. I'm needing it bad enough, replied Olson. Further conversations with Olson gleaned the facts that he was the only farmer in their immediate neighborhood who did not have at least a little grain worth harvesting. But the amount was small and would require only slight time. Olson named farmers that would very likely not take kindly to Torrance' proposition and had best not be approached. The majority, however, would stand by him irrespective of the large wage offered, because the issue was one to appeal to the pride of the Bend farmers. Olson appeared surprisingly well informed upon the tactics of the IWW and predicted that they would cause trouble but be run out of the country. He made the shrewd observation that when even those farmers who sympathized with Germany discovered that their wheat fields were being menaced by foreign influences and protected by the home government, they would experience a change of heart. Olson said the war would be a good thing for the United States because they would win it, and during the winning would learn and suffer and achieve much. Kurt rode away from Olson in a more thoughtful frame of mind. How different and interesting the points of view of different men. Olson had never taken the time to become a naturalized citizen of the United States. There had never been anything to force him to do it. But his understanding of the worth of the United States and his loyalty to it were manifest in his love for his wheatlands. In fact, they were inseparable. Probably there were millions of pioneers, immigrants, aliens all over the country who were like Olson, who needed the fire of the crucible to mold them into a unity with Americans. Of such, Americans were molded. Kurt rode all day, and when, late that night, he got home, weary and sore and choked, he had enlisted the services of 35 farmers to help him harvest that now famous section of wheat. His father had plainly doubted the willingness of these neighbors to abandon their own labors, for the band exacted toil for every hour of every season, whether rich or poor in yield. Likewise, he was plainly moved by the facts. His seamed and shaded face of gloom had a moment of light. "They will make short work of this harvest," he said thoughtfully. "I should say so," retorted Kurt. "We'll harvest and haul that grain to the railroad in just 3 days." "Puh, impossible!" ejaculated Dorn. "You'll see," declared Kurt. "You'll see who's managing this harvest." He could not restrain his little outburst of pride. For the moment, the great overhanging sense of calamity that for long had haunted him faded into the background. It did seem sure that they would save this splendid yield of wheat. How much that meant to Kurt in freedom from debt, in natural love of the fruition of harvest, in the loyalty to his government. He realized how strange and strong was the need in him to prove he was American to the very core of his heart. He did not yet understand that incentive, but he felt it. After eating dinner, Kurt took his rifle and went out to relieve Jerry. "Only a few more days and nights," he exclaimed to his foreman. "Then we'll have all the harvesters in the country right in our wheat." "Wow, hell, a lot can happen before then," declared Jerry pessimistically. Kurt was brought back to the realities rather suddenly. But questioning Jerry did not elicit any new or immediate cause for worry. Jerry appeared tired out. "You go get some sleep," said Kurt. "All right. Bill's been dividing his night watch with me. I reckon he'll be out when he wakes up," replied Jerry, and trudged away. Kurt shouldered his rifle and slowly walked along the road, with a strange sense that he was already doing army duty in protecting property which was at once his own and his country's.